The morning light filtered through my kitchen window as I stood frozen, my hand still gripping the doorknob I had just turned. The words that pierced through the silence of my own home struck me like lightning through my chest. My mother passed away in her sleep, without pain, but I was very much alive, standing in my own hallway, listening to my son Daniel's voice drift from the living room where I had left him just 20 minutes earlier. 20 minutes that changed everything I thought I knew about the family I had sacrificed everything for. My name is Eleanor Price. I'm 63 years old, and I live in this modest 2-story house in Toronto, Ontario, the same house where I raised Daniel after his father abandoned us when he was only 8. For 32 years, I've been both mother and father to that boy, working double shifts at the textile factory, skipping meals so he could have new school clothes, postponing my own dreams so he could attend university. Every wrinkle on my face, every gray hair on my head, every ache in my arthritic hands, they all told the story of a mother's unconditional love. I had just returned from my weekly grocery run, planning to prepare a special dinner for Daniel's upcoming birthday next week. At 32, he still loved my homemade lasagna, and I had spent my pension money on the finest ingredients, including that expensive Parmesan cheese he always requested. The shopping bags felt heavier now, not from their contents, but from the weight of betrayal crushing down on my shoulders. How long until it takes effect? The voice belonged to Samantha, my daughter-in-law of 3 years, the woman I had welcomed into our family with open arms, the woman I had helped plan her wedding to Daniel, spending $15,000 of my retirement savings to give them the ceremony of their dreams because her own parents couldn't afford it. Daniel's response made my blood run cold. It will be quick. She has to die during the day. My legs trembled as I carefully set the grocery bags down, my hands shaking so violently that I had to grip the wall for support. These weren't characters in some television drama. These were my own flesh and blood, discussing my death as casually as they might discuss the weather. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain they would hear it. Through the gap in the doorway, I could see Daniel sitting on the very couch I had bought him for his first apartment, the couch he brought back when he moved in with me temporarily 3 years ago to save money for their future. Samantha sat beside him, her perfectly manicured nails I had paid for at the salon as a birthday gift, tapping against what looked like insurance documents. "The policy is substantial," Daniel continued, his voice carrying a coldness I had never heard before. $800,000, plus the house is worth at least $600,000 in this market. We'll finally be able to start fresh, maybe move to Vancouver like we always planned. $800,000. The life insurance policy I had maintained for decades, originally intended to secure Daniel's future, to ensure he would never face the financial struggles I had endured. The house, my sanctuary, my legacy, the place where I had hoped to hold grandchildren someday, reduced to mere numbers in their scheme. "And you're certain about the method?" Samantha asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough to shatter what remained of my faith in humanity. "Completely untraceable," Daniel replied. "Natural causes, heart failure. At her age, with her stress levels, no one will question it." The room began to spin around me. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be my Daniel, the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who cried when I was sick with pneumonia, who promised at his wedding that he would always take care of me. But it was happening, and as I stood there listening to them plan my murder, I realized that the sweet, devoted son I thought I knew had died long ago, replaced by this cold stranger who saw me only as an obstacle to his inheritance. On the day of their plan, I would indeed give them a surprise, one they would never forget. If you're feeling the intensity of Eleanor's discovery, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories. Also, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. The following days passed in a haze of disbelief and careful observation. I moved through my routine like an actress playing a role, serving Daniel his morning coffee with steady hands while my mind raced with the implications of what I had overheard. Every smile he gave me felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. "Mom, you look tired," Daniel said on Thursday morning, his voice dripping with false concern as he watched me fumble with the coffee pot. "Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison about your blood pressure medication." The irony wasn't lost on me. The very medication they planned to use against me was now being suggested with such tender care. I forced a smile, the same smile I had perfected over 30 years of hiding my struggles from him. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just haven't been sleeping well." Samantha emerged from the guest bedroom, my former sewing room that I'd converted for them, disposing of my grandmother's antique sewing machine to make space for their California king bed. She wore silk pajamas that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, purchased with the credit card I had co-signed for them during their temporary financial difficulties. "Good morning, Mom Eleanor," she cooed, using the affectionate nickname that now sounded like poison on her lips. "I was thinking we should take you shopping this weekend. You need some new clothes." New clothes for my funeral, I thought bitterly. How thoughtful of them to want me to look presentable for my final appearance. I retreated to my bedroom and pulled out the small notebook I kept in my nightstand drawer, the same drawer where I stored my will, the document that left everything to Daniel. With trembling fingers, I began writing down every detail I could remember from their conversation, every suspicious interaction since then. If something happened to me, there needed to be a record. That evening, while they thought I was asleep, I heard them talking again. This time, I had strategically left my bedroom door slightly ajar and positioned myself to hear clearly. "The birthday dinner is perfect," Samantha whispered. "Everyone will be here. Your aunt, the neighbors. When she collapses, you'll be the grieving son trying to save her." "I've been researching symptoms," Daniel replied. "Chest pain, shortness of breath, then unconsciousness. I'll call 911 immediately, perform CPR. They'll see a devoted son doing everything possible." My birthday dinner. The celebration I had been planning for weeks, using my grocery money to buy ingredients for all of Daniel's favorite dishes. I had invited my sister Margaret, my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, and the young couple from next door who always helped me with my yard work. They would all witness my planned murder, unknowing participants in Daniel and Samantha's theatrical performance. "What about the money?" Samantha asked. "When do we gain access?" "Life insurance pays out within 30 days of the death certificate," Daniel explained, with the cold efficiency of someone who had clearly done extensive research. "The house will take longer, but we can take out a loan against it immediately. We'll be in Vancouver before anyone asks questions." Vancouver, the city where Samantha's college boyfriend lived, the one I had discovered she was still texting, despite her marriage to my son. I had kept that secret, foolishly believing it was just innocent nostalgia. Now I understood it was part of their exit strategy. I thought about the $45,000 I had withdrawn from my retirement account last year when Daniel claimed he needed surgery for a hernia. Surgery that he never had, money that he used to pay off gambling debts I knew nothing about until I accidentally saw his laptop screen. I thought about the $12,000 I had lent Samantha for her sick mother in Vancouver, a mother who was apparently healthy enough to help them start their new life. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. While Daniel and Samantha went to their respective jobs they claimed barely paid enough to cover their expenses while living rent-free in my house, I walked to the Royal Bank of Canada branch where I had maintained accounts for 40 years. "Mrs. Price," greeted Janet, the manager who had helped me navigate my finances since my husband left. "How can we help you today?" "I need to make some changes to my accounts," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "and I need to speak with someone about safety deposit boxes." The first phase of my surprise was about to begin. Armed with new determination, I began my own investigation into the extent of Daniel and Samantha's deception. The next morning, while they both left for work, I systematically searched their room for the first time since they had moved in. What I discovered broke my heart into even smaller pieces. Hidden beneath Samantha's silk scarves were printed emails between her and someone named Marcus, emails detailing their plans for a life together in Vancouver, complete with photographs of condominiums they planned to purchase with Eleanor's money. The casual way they discussed my future death, as if I were already gone, made my hands shake as I photographed each page with my old flip phone. But it was Daniel's laptop that revealed the true depth of their betrayal. His browser history was a roadmap of premeditation, searches for untraceable poisons, natural heart attack symptoms, life insurance investigation procedures, and most chilling of all, how long before police stop investigating elderly deaths. In his email drafts, I found a half-written message to a life insurance agent. "I'm concerned about my mother's health. She's been having chest pains and refusing to see a doctor. If something happens to her, what's the claims process? My son had been laying groundwork for my murder for months. I also discovered financial documents that painted a clear picture of their desperation. Daniel owed $67,000 in gambling debts to people who weren't asking politely for repayment. Samantha had maxed out 7 credit cards, totaling $43,000 in debt, most of it spent on luxury items and trips to Vancouver to see Marcus. The most devastating discovery was a folder labeled New Life Vancouver, filled with apartment listings, job applications, and even school district information for children they planned to have together. My entire existence had been reduced to a financial obstacle in their vision board. That afternoon, I visited my lawyer, Mrs. Patterson, who had handled my legal affairs for 15 years. Her office overlooked Toronto's financial district, and as I sat in her leather chair, I felt a strength I hadn't experienced in years. "Eleanor, you look troubled," she observed, her silver hair and kind eyes reminding me of the friend she had become over the years. "What brings you here today?" I told her everything. Every word I had overheard, every piece of evidence I had discovered, every lie they had told me over the past 3 years. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew increasingly grave as I spoke. "Eleanor, what you're describing sounds like conspiracy to commit murder," she said solemnly. "Have you considered going to the police?" "Not yet," I replied. "I want them to show their hand first. I want proof that would hold up in court." "What did you have in mind?" I outlined my plan. A plan that would require courage I wasn't sure I possessed, but that would ensure Daniel and Samantha could never hurt anyone else the way they had planned to hurt me. Mrs. Patterson leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Eleanor, in 30 years of practicing law, I've never had a client propose anything quite so poetic." We spent the next 2 hours revising my will, setting up new financial arrangements, and discussing legal protections. By the time I left her office, phase 2 of my surprise was in motion. That evening, I cooked Daniel's favorite meal, beef stew with fresh bread, and watched him eat with the appetite of a man who believed he was days away from freedom. Samantha complimented the meal effusively, her performance of the loving daughter-in-law now sickeningly transparent. "Mom, I've been thinking," Daniel said as he helped himself to seconds. "Maybe it's time you updated your will. You haven't looked at it in years." "Oh, sweetheart, that's such a morbid topic," I replied, playing the naive mother perfectly. "I'm not going anywhere anytime soon." Samantha reached across the table and patted my hand. "It's just good planning, Mom Eleanor. Daniel and I want to make sure your wishes are honored when the time comes. When the time comes. The time they plan to make come very soon." "Actually," I said, as if the idea had just occurred to me, "maybe you're right. Why don't we all go see Mrs. Patterson next week? After my birthday dinner, of course." The look that passed between them was electric with anticipation. They thought they had successfully manipulated me into securing their inheritance just before they eliminated me. If only they knew what Mrs. Patterson and I had really discussed. 3 days before my planned murder, which also happened to be my 63rd birthday, I noticed subtle changes in Daniel and Samantha's behavior that would have been imperceptible to anyone who hadn't been watching for them. Samantha began taking phone calls outside, always walking to the far corner of our backyard where she thought I couldn't see her from the kitchen window. During one of these calls, I watched her gesticulate excitedly, and through the window crack, I caught fragments. "Just 3 more days, and pack everything while she's at church Sunday." Daniel started being unusually helpful, offering to run errands, insisting on driving me to my doctor's appointment, even volunteering to organize my medications, an offer that made my blood run cold. When I politely declined, explaining that I preferred to manage my own prescriptions, I saw a flash of frustration cross his face before he recovered his mask of concern. "Mom, I just want to help," he said, his voice taking on that wheedling tone I remembered from his teenage years when he wanted something. "You're getting older, and sometimes people forget to take their pills correctly." "I'm fine, Daniel," I replied firmly. 63 isn't ancient, but in their minds, it was old enough to die of natural causes without raising suspicion. That Friday evening, while they attended what they claimed was a work function, I put the next phase of my plan into action. I called my sister Margaret, who lived 2 hours away in Hamilton. "Maggie," I said, using her childhood nickname, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to trust me completely. Margaret, 5 years younger, but infinitely more suspicious of people's motives, listened as I explained everything I had discovered. Unlike Mrs. Patterson, who had remained professionally composed, Margaret exploded with fury. "Those absolute monsters!" she screamed into the phone. "Eleanor, you call the police right now." "Not yet," I said. "I need irrefutable proof, audio evidence. I need them to incriminate themselves so thoroughly that there's no possibility of them talking their way out of it. What do you need me to do?" I outlined my plan, and Margaret, despite her concerns for my safety, agreed to help. We synchronized our watches and went over every detail 3 times. There could be no mistakes. Saturday morning brought an unexpected development. While Daniel showered, Samantha approached me in the kitchen with an expression I had never seen before, something between guilt and desperation. "Mom, Eleanor," she began hesitantly, "I need to tell you something." My heart stopped. Had she developed a conscience? Was she going to confess and ask for forgiveness? "Daniel and I have been struggling financially," she continued, dashing my hopes. "More than we've let on. If something were to happen to you, I mean, God forbid, but if something did happen, we would need to sell the house quickly." She was softening me up, ensuring I wouldn't question any rapid financial moves after my death. Even now, she was thinking strategically, laying groundwork for their escape. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, playing into her manipulation. "You know this house will be yours and Daniel's someday, but let's not talk about such sad things before my birthday." "Of course," she smiled, but her eyes remained calculating. "I just wanted you to know that if anything happened, we would handle everything. You wouldn't want to burden anyone else, like Margaret, who would inherit everything under my new will, like Mrs. Patterson, who would execute my true final wishes, like the police, who would investigate when my sister insisted my death was suspicious." That afternoon, I made my final preparations. I tested the small recording device Mrs. Patterson had helped me acquire, a device so tiny it would remain undetected even if they searched me. I rehearsed my performance, practicing the exact words that would prompt them to reveal their full plan. Most importantly, I wrote a letter to be opened only if something went wrong, a letter that contained every detail of their plot, every piece of evidence I had gathered, and explicit instructions for Margaret and Mrs. Patterson. As the sun set on what was supposed to be my last Saturday alive, I sat in my garden, looking at the roses I had planted when Daniel was a child. I had nurtured those bushes for over 20 years, feeding them, protecting them from harsh winters, pruning them with careful attention. Tomorrow, I would discover whether my son possessed any of the beauty I had tried to cultivate in him, or if he had become something that needed to be uprooted entirely. The birthday dinner was less than 24 hours away. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. I woke at 6, as I had every day for 40 years, and padded to the kitchen to start the coffee. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Chen tending to her garden next door, and for a moment, I envied her peaceful ignorance of what this day would bring. Daniel appeared unusually early before 7, which should have been my first warning. He never woke before 9 on weekends. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek with lips that felt cold against my skin. I can't believe my mother is 63 years old and apparently too old to live, I thought bitterly. Samantha emerged shortly after, carrying a beautifully wrapped gift box. "We wanted to give you this before the party," she said, her smile so bright it hurt to look at. Inside the elegant box was a silk scarf, expensive, beautiful, and utterly impractical for my lifestyle. The kind of gift you buy for someone you don't really know, or someone you want to remember you fondly in their final hours. "It's lovely," I said, wrapping it around my shoulders. "I'll wear it tonight." "You should," Daniel agreed quickly. "It brings out your eyes." My eyes that would be closed forever before midnight if their plan succeeded. The day progressed with orchestrated normalcy. Daniel insisted on helping with the dinner preparation, hovering near me in the kitchen, offering to handle tasks he had never shown interest in before. When I prepared my medications for the evening, my blood pressure pills, arthritis relief, and heart medication, he watched with intense focus. "Mom, maybe you should skip your evening pills tonight," he suggested casually. "You know how alcohol and medication don't mix, and we're having wine with dinner." "Just one glass won't hurt," I replied, noting how his jaw tightened at my response. Samantha spent the afternoon decorating the dining room with flowers and candles, creating what I now realized was meant to be an elegant setting for my final meal. She arranged the lighting carefully, ensuring soft, romantic ambiance that would mask any signs of distress I might display. At 4 o'clock, Margaret arrived with a bottle of my favorite wine and a gift bag containing a new sweater she had knitted herself. As planned, she was slightly early, giving us time to position the recording device and review our signals. "You look beautiful, Eleanor," she said, embracing me tightly and whispering in my ear. "The device is active. I love you, sister." By 5:30, all the other guests had arrived. Mrs. Chen with her famous dumplings, the young couple from next door with a homemade cake, and Daniel's Aunt Patricia, who had driven in from Mississauga. 8 people total, including my son and daughter-in-law. 8 witnesses to what was supposed to be my murder. The dinner itself was surreal. I found myself observing everyone with heightened awareness, cataloging their expressions, their voices, their genuine affection for me. Mrs. Chen complimented my lasagna 3 times. The young neighbors, Emma and David, shared news about their upcoming baby. Aunt Patricia regaled us with stories about Daniel's childhood that made everyone laugh. And through it all, Daniel and Samantha played their parts perfectly. The devoted son and loving daughter-in-law, attentive to my every need, ensuring my wine glass never emptied, encouraging me to try every dish. "Mom, you've barely touched your food," Daniel observed when the main course was nearly finished. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just overwhelmed by all this love," I replied truthfully, though not in the way he interpreted. As we moved to dessert, the chocolate cake I had baked myself, Daniel's favorite since childhood, I noticed Samantha checking her phone repeatedly. At exactly 8 o'clock, she excused herself to use the restroom, and I saw Daniel's eyes follow her departure. This was it, the timing they had planned. When Samantha returned, she carried a small wrapped gift. "One more surprise, Mom Eleanor," she announced to the table. "Daniel and I wanted to give you something special." Inside was a silver locket, beautiful and clearly expensive. As she fastened it around my neck, her fingers lingered at my pulse point, and I understood. She was checking my heart rate, establishing a baseline for what was to come. "It's beautiful," I said, fingering the locket. "Thank you both." "There's something inside," Daniel added. A picture of the 3 of us from last Christmas. Last Christmas, when I had spent $3,000, I couldn't afford to make their holiday perfect, buying them everything on their wish lists while I wrapped my own gifts in newspaper because I couldn't afford proper wrapping paper. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I felt the weight of anticipation in the air. Margaret was the last non-family member to go, hugging me goodbye with extra tenderness and reminding me to call her tomorrow to tell me all about how the rest of the evening went. The rest of the evening that was supposed to end with my death. By 9 o'clock, it was just the 3 of us, sitting in the candlelit dining room with empty wine glasses and the detritus of what should have been a joyful celebration. "That was perfect, Mom," Daniel said, his voice softer now, more intimate. "I'm so glad we could celebrate you properly." The past tense wasn't lost on me. In his mind, this celebration was already a memory. "I'm exhausted," I announced, rising from the table and beginning to clear the dessert plates. "What a wonderful day." "Mom, sit down," Daniel said firmly, his tone more authoritative than I had heard in years. "You're the birthday girl. Samantha and I will clean up." This was new. In 3 years of living in my house, I couldn't remember either of them volunteering to clean anything. But tonight, they were eager to send me to my room, to separate me from potential witnesses, to begin the final phase of their plan. "That's very sweet," I replied, "but I'm too wound up to sleep. Birthday excitement, you know." I saw frustration flash across Samantha's face before she recovered her composure. "Maybe some chamomile tea would help you relax," she suggested. "I'll make you a cup." Chamomile tea, the perfect vehicle for whatever they planned to slip me. "Actually," I said, settling back into my chair, "I'd love to sit here a bit longer. This candlelight is so peaceful, and I want to savor the evening." Daniel and Samantha exchanged a look loaded with meaning. Their timeline was being disrupted, and I could feel their anxiety building. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice taking on a coaxing tone, "you really should get some rest. You've had a big day, and you're not as young as you used to be. Not as young as I used to be." How true, but not in the way he meant. At 63, I was old enough to recognize pure evil when it sat at my dinner table wearing the faces of people I loved. "Oh, I feel quite energetic actually," I said brightly. "In fact, I've been thinking about some changes I want to make. New beginnings, you might say." This caught their attention immediately. Samantha leaned forward, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the predatory gleam in her eyes. "What kind of changes, Mom Eleanor?" "Well," I said, settling back in my chair, "I've been thinking about my will." The silence that followed was electric. I could practically hear their heartbeats accelerating. "Your will?" Daniel repeated carefully. "Yes, it's terribly out of date. I was thinking of leaving more specific instructions about my end-of-life care, my funeral arrangements, that sort of thing." "That's very thoughtful," Samantha said slowly. "Have you given any thought to how you'd want things handled?" "Actually, I have very specific ideas," I replied, watching their faces carefully. "For instance, I wouldn't want anyone to go to extraordinary measures to save me if I had a heart attack or stroke. Sometimes it's better to let nature take its course." Daniel's poker face was slipping. I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes, wondering if I was somehow aware of their plan, if this was coincidence or something more sinister. "Mom, that's morbid talk for your birthday," he said with forced lightness. "Is it? I don't think so. At my age, it's practical. In fact, I've been having some chest pains lately." This lie had the desired effect. Both Daniel and Samantha sat up straighter, like predators scenting wounded prey. "Chest pains?" Samantha asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "Have you seen Dr. Morrison?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. Probably just stress, though I did read an article about women having different heart attack symptoms than men. Did you know that women often don't have the classic crushing chest pain? Sometimes it's just shortness of breath, nausea, feeling faint." I was reciting the very symptoms they had planned to claim I experienced, the symptoms Daniel had researched so carefully. I watched recognition dawn in his eyes, the realization that I was describing their exact script. "Mom," Daniel said slowly, "why are you talking about this?" This was the moment. The recording device was capturing everything. Margaret was waiting for my signal, and I was about to spring the trap I had spent days preparing. "Because, my dear son," I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I know exactly what you and Samantha have been planning." The change in their expressions was instantaneous and terrifying. Daniel's mask of concern dissolved into something cold and calculating, while Samantha's face went completely white. "I don't know what you mean," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't you?" I stood slowly, my hand moving to the locket at my throat, the signal Margaret was watching for through the kitchen window. "I know about the life insurance research. I know about the gambling debts. I know about Marcus in Vancouver." Samantha gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. "I know," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, "that you've been planning to murder me tonight during my birthday dinner and make it look like a heart attack." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, I thought they might try to deny it, might attempt to gaslight me into believing I was paranoid or confused. Instead, Daniel laughed. It was a sound I had never heard from him before, cold, bitter, and completely devoid of the warmth I had associated with my son for 32 years. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair with disturbing casualness, "I guess there's no point in pretending anymore." Daniel's transformation was complete and terrifying. Gone was any pretense of the loving son, replaced by a stranger whose eyes held nothing but cold calculation. He looked at me the way someone might look at an obstacle to be removed, not a person who had sacrificed everything for his welfare. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "Long enough," I replied, fighting to keep my own voice steady. "Long enough to discover that the son I raised died somewhere along the way, replaced by someone I don't recognize." Samantha found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. "Eleanor, it's not what you think." "Shut up," Daniel snapped at her, his mask slipping further. "It's exactly what she thinks." He turned back to me, and I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Relief. Relief that he no longer had to pretend. "Do you want to know when it started, Mother?" The way he said "mother" made it sound like a curse. "When I realized that you were nothing but a burden, a needy, clingy woman who had already lived longer than she deserved." Each word hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain standing, to keep the recording device active, to let him reveal the full extent of his evil. "It was 3 years ago," he continued, "when Samantha and I wanted to start our life together, and you kept interfering. 'Daniel, you can't move out. I need you. Daniel, I can't afford the house payments alone. Daniel, what will I do without you? I never said those things, I whispered. But even as the words left my mouth, I realized the futility of arguing with someone who had rewritten our entire history to justify his actions. You didn't have to say them, he spat. You said them with every martyred sigh, every guilt trip about your sacrifices, every reminder of how much you'd given up for me. Do you know what it's like to have someone's entire existence revolve around you? To know that someone expects you to be grateful for sacrifices you never asked them to make? The injustice of his words was staggering. I had never asked for gratitude, never made him feel guilty for my choices. I had simply loved him unconditionally, the way mothers do. So you decided to kill me, I said, marveling at how steady my voice sounded. We decided to free ourselves, Samantha interjected, finally finding her courage. Eleanor, you have to understand. We're young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. This house, the insurance money, it would give us the fresh start we deserve. The fresh start they deserved, as if my death was some sort of gift they had earned. And the gambling debts? I asked Daniel. Were those part of the fresh start you deserved? His face darkened. That's none of your business. $67,000 of debt to very dangerous people. I'd say that makes it my business, since you plan to pay it with my blood money. How did you... He stopped himself, but the admission was already clear. I know about all of it, Daniel. The staged medical emergency Samantha researched, the poison that would mimic a heart attack, the timeline you calculated to ensure maximum believability. I even know about the performance you planned, the grieving son trying desperately to save his beloved mother. For the first time, real fear flickered across his face. You can't prove any of that, can't I? I smiled, and it felt like the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks. Daniel, do you remember what you used to say when you were little and got caught doing something wrong? He stared at me, confusion replacing some of the anger. You'd say, but Mom, you don't have any evidence. Even as a child, you understood that proof mattered. Well, sweetheart, I have evidence now. Lots of it. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Not the old flip phone they had seen me use, but a new smartphone Margaret had helped me purchase and set up. I have photographs of your research, screenshots of your emails, recordings of your conversations. Samantha's face went ashen. Recordings? Did you really think I'd sit passively while you planned my murder? I've been recording everything for days, every conversation, every planning session, every detail of your scheme. Daniel lunged toward me, but I had anticipated this reaction. I stepped back quickly, my hand moving to my throat again, the second signal. I wouldn't if I were you, I said calmly. Margaret is watching from the kitchen window. If anything happens to me now, she has instructions to call the police immediately, and the recordings are automatically uploaded to a secure server. Hurting me now would only add to your charges. Daniel froze, his hand extended toward me, finally understanding that his prey had become the predator. Charges? Samantha's voice was barely audible. Conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, fraud. Oh, and Daniel, threatening a witness. I looked at his extended hand, which he slowly lowered. I think that covers the basics. The silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of destroyed relationships and shattered illusions. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice hollow. So what now? You call the police? Have us arrested? Oh, Daniel, I said, and for the first time in this conversation, my voice carried genuine sadness. That's just the beginning. The sound of sirens piercing the quiet Sunday evening air was music to my ears. Margaret had made the call exactly as planned, and within minutes, our peaceful residential street was illuminated by the flashing lights of police cars. Daniel and Samantha had spent those minutes in stunned silence, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. I watched years of entitlement and false confidence crumble away, leaving behind two people who suddenly looked much younger and far more vulnerable than they had moments before. Eleanor, please, Samantha whispered as the sirens grew closer. We can work this out. We can get help. We never actually went through with it. Conspiracy to commit murder doesn't require completion, I replied quietly. Intent and planning are quite enough. Detective Maria Santos entered my dining room like a force of nature, tall, commanding, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Margaret had called her specifically, knowing from our previous conversations that Detective Santos specialized in elder abuse cases and had a particular passion for protecting vulnerable seniors. "Mrs. Price," Detective Santos said, her voice both professional and warm, "I understand you have evidence of a plot against your life." "Extensive evidence," I confirmed, handing her the smartphone containing the recordings. "Everything is documented." As Detective Santos reviewed the audio files, her expression grew increasingly grim. The recordings were crystal clear. Daniel and Samantha discussing dosages, timing, the insurance payout, even their plans to move to Vancouver afterward. "Daniel Price and Samantha Price," Detective Santos said formally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, elder abuse, and fraud." Watching my son be handcuffed in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of his birthday dinner for me, was surreal. The boy I had rocked to sleep, whose fevered brow I had cooled, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, was now being read his Miranda rights for planning my murder. "Mom," Daniel said, as the officer guided him toward the door, his voice cracking for the first time that evening. "Mom, I'm sorry. I never meant—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted, my voice steady and clear. "You researched it, planned it, and would have executed it. The only thing you're sorry about is getting caught." Samantha tried a different approach as they led her past me. "Eleanor, you don't understand the pressure we were under, the debts, the threats." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "I understand that when faced with problems of your own making, you chose to solve them by murdering an innocent woman who had only ever loved and supported you." The house felt eerily quiet after the police cars left, taking Daniel and Samantha to jail. Margaret and I sat in my kitchen, drinking tea and processing what had just occurred. "Eleanor," Margaret said quietly, "how are you feeling?" It was a complex question. I felt relieved, vindicated, heartbroken, angry, and strangely empty all at once. "Like I've been living with strangers for 3 years, I replied honestly. Over the following weeks, more details emerged during the investigation. Detective Santos discovered that Daniel's gambling problem was far worse than even I had realized. He owed money to 3 different criminal organizations, with threats escalating to violence. Samantha's affair with Marcus in Vancouver had been ongoing since before her marriage to Daniel, and they had been planning their new life together for over a year. Most shocking was the discovery that this wasn't their first attempt at insurance fraud. 3 years earlier, Samantha had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on her own elderly aunt, who had died under suspicious circumstances that were never fully investigated. The aunt's death had provided the initial funding for Daniel and Samantha's lifestyle, and my murder was intended to be their graduation to even bigger payoffs. The financial investigation revealed the true scope of their deception. Not only had they stolen the $45,000 for Daniel's fake surgery and the $12,000 for Samantha's fictional sick mother, but they had also been systematically draining my accounts for months. Small amounts, $200 here, $500 there, that I had attributed to my own forgetfulness or bank errors. In total, they had stolen $73,000 from me over 3 years, money I had worked 40 years to save, money that represented security in my golden years. Mrs. Patterson proved invaluable during this period, helping me understand my rights and options. "Eleanor," she said during one of our meetings, "you have grounds for a substantial civil lawsuit in addition to the criminal charges." "I don't want their money," I replied. "I want justice." "Sometimes," she smiled, "they're the same thing." 6 months later, I sat in the witness box of Toronto Superior Court, looking directly at Daniel and Samantha as I testified about their plot to murder me. The courtroom was packed. The case had attracted significant media attention as one of the most shocking examples of elder abuse in recent Canadian history. Daniel looked gaunt and older, the months in jail having stripped away his youthful arrogance. Samantha sat beside her lawyer, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with tissues, though I noticed the tears never quite seemed to reach her cheeks. Crown Attorney James Mitchell led me through my testimony with careful precision. The recordings were played in their entirety, filling the courtroom with the chilling sound of my son and daughter-in-law casually discussing my murder. Several jurors visibly recoiled when they heard Daniel say, "It will be quick. She has to die during the day." "Mrs. Price," Attorney Mitchell asked, "when you heard your son planning your death, what went through your mind?" I realized that the child I had raised was gone, I replied honestly. In his place was someone capable of viewing my life as nothing more than an obstacle to his financial freedom. The defense tried various strategies, claiming Daniel was mentally ill, suggesting Samantha was manipulated and coerced, even attempting to paint me as a controlling mother who had driven them to desperate measures. None of it resonated with the jury, who had heard the recordings and seen the evidence of premeditation. The most damaging testimony came from Detective Santos, who had uncovered the full scope of their research and planning. She presented browser histories showing months of searches for untraceable poisons, elderly heart attack symptoms, and life insurance investigation procedures. Email drafts revealed Daniel had been corresponding with the insurance company, laying groundwork for a quick payout. The level of premeditation was extraordinary, Detective Santos testified. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation, it was a carefully calculated business decision. When Daniel took the stand in his own defense, I watched him try to reconstruct our relationship in a way that painted him as the victim. According to his testimony, I was a manipulative, guilt-inducing mother who had trapped him in a cycle of dependency. She made me feel responsible for her happiness, he claimed. Every day, it was about what she had sacrificed for me, what I owed her. Did your mother ever directly ask you to stay in her house? His lawyer asked. Not in so many words, but did she ever threaten you if you moved out? No, but the implication. Did she ever ask you for money or demand financial support? Daniel hesitated. She never asked directly. So your mother never demanded you stay, never threatened you, never asked for money, but you decided the solution was to murder her? The prosecutor's cross-examination was devastating. Daniel's justifications crumbled under scrutiny, revealing them to be the self-serving delusions they were. Samantha's testimony was even worse. She alternated between claiming she was an innocent victim of Daniel's manipulation and suggesting that I was somehow responsible for driving them to consider murder. Mrs. Price was very controlling, she testified. She monitored our finances, questioned our decisions, made us feel like children. You lived in her house rent-free for 3 years, the prosecutor pointed out. She paid for your wedding, your credit cards, your expenses. Is financial support typically considered controlling behavior? It wasn't like that. Wasn't it exactly like that? Wasn't Mrs. Price providing you with free housing, utilities, food, and financial support, while asking nothing in return except that you treat her with basic respect? By the end of the trial, even Samantha's lawyer seemed disgusted with her client. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and delivered verdicts that rang through the courtroom like a bell. Guilty on all counts. Daniel was sentenced to 25 years to life for conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. Samantha received 20 years, with eligibility for parole in 12. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Wynne, was particularly harsh in her sentencing remarks. This court has rarely seen such callous disregard for human life, Judge Wynne stated. The victim in this case was not a stranger, but a woman who had devoted her entire adult life to caring for one defendant and had welcomed the other into her family with open arms. The level of betrayal and premeditation is beyond comprehension. She looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Price, your mother gave you life, raised you alone, sacrificed her own dreams for your future, and provided you with unconditional love for 32 years. Your response was to plan her murder for financial gain. This court cannot conceive of a more profound betrayal of the most fundamental human bonds. As the bailiffs led them away, Daniel turned back one last time. "Mom," he called out, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for just a moment, I saw a flash of the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared. But that little boy was gone, buried under years of selfishness and entitlement that I had somehow failed to see developing. "I know you are, Daniel," I said quietly, "but sorry doesn't resurrect the dead." 1 year after the trial, I stood in my garden on a crisp October morning, tending to the roses I had planted when Daniel was a child. The bushes were healthier than they had been in years, and I chose to see that as a metaphor for my own life. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the painful memories embedded in its walls. I had considered selling it, starting fresh somewhere else, but ultimately decided that running away would let Daniel and Samantha take even more from me than they already had. This was my home, purchased with my sweat and sacrifice, and I refused to abandon it. Margaret visited every weekend now, sometimes staying for days at a time. We had grown closer through this ordeal, our sisterly bond strengthened by shared trauma and mutual support. She was helping me redecorate the guest room, Samantha's former space, turning it back into the sewing room it had been originally. "Eleanor," she said one Saturday morning as we sorted through fabric patterns, "have you given any thought to what you want to do with the rest of your life?" It was a question I had been asking myself for months. At 63, I had been given something rare, a second chance at life, literally. The question was, how to use it. The civil lawsuit Mrs. Patterson had filed on my behalf had been settled out of court. The insurance companies, horrified by the negative publicity, had paid substantial damages. Combined with the recovery of the money Daniel and Samantha had stolen, plus interest and penalties, I was now more financially secure than I had ever been. But more importantly, I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed. The woman who had uncovered a murder plot, gathered evidence, and orchestrated the capture of the perpetrators was not the same woman who had spent years making herself smaller to accommodate others' needs. "I've been thinking about volunteering," I told Margaret. "Detective Santos mentioned that the police department needs volunteers to help elderly victims of financial abuse." "That's perfect," Margaret smiled. "Who better to help than someone who's been through it herself?" I had also been contacted by several organizations working on elder abuse prevention. My story had resonated with many people. The idea that abuse could come from those closest to you, that love could be weaponized, that financial desperation could drive people to unthinkable acts. The insurance money, the very money Daniel and Samantha had planned to steal through my murder, was now funding a scholarship program I had established for young adults aging out of foster care. If Daniel had been driven partly by financial desperation, perhaps helping others find legitimate paths to financial stability would prevent similar tragedies. Mrs. Chen knocked on my back door as I watered the garden, carrying a plate of her famous dumplings and wearing the concerned expression that had become familiar over the past year. "Eleanor, dear," she said in her gentle voice, "how are you feeling today?" Mrs. Chen had been devastated to learn she had been an unwitting witness to a planned murder, that her innocent presence at my birthday dinner was meant to lend credibility to Daniel's performance as a grieving son. She had blamed herself for not seeing the signs, despite my repeated assurances that even I hadn't recognized them until it was almost too late. "I'm feeling grateful," I told her honestly. "Grateful to be alive, grateful for friends like you, grateful for the chance to make something meaningful from all this pain." That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Morrison, my longtime physician, had stopped by to check on me, a house call he insisted on making every few months since the trial. "Eleanor," he said as I served him tea in my living room, "I have to ask, how did you manage to maintain your composure through all of this? Most people would have fallen apart." I considered his question carefully. "I think," I said slowly, "that when someone tries to take everything from you, your life, your dignity, your faith in human nature, you have two choices. You can let them succeed, or you can refuse to give them that power." And you refused. I refused. Daniel and Samantha took 3 years of my life, $73,000 of my money, and most painfully, they took my ability to trust unconditionally. But they didn't get to take my life, and they don't get to define my future. As evening approached, I sat in my reading chair, the same chair where I used to read bedtime stories to Daniel, and opened the journal I had been keeping since the trial. Writing had become therapeutic, a way to process the complex emotions of surviving a betrayal so profound it had redefined my understanding of human nature. "Today marks 1 year since the verdict," I wrote. 1 year since justice was served. 1 year since I reclaimed my life from those who would have stolen it. I am not the same woman I was 2 years ago. That woman was naive, trusting to a fault, willing to sacrifice her own well-being for others without question. This woman is wiser, stronger, more careful with her trust, but not hardened. I refuse to let their cruelty make me cruel. As I finished writing, my phone rang. It was Detective Santos, calling with her monthly check-in. "Eleanor," she said warmly, "I wanted to let you know that Daniel has been placed in protective custody. Apparently, word of his crime has spread through the prison population, and inmates don't take kindly to those who target elderly family members." "Is he safe?" I asked, surprised by my own concern. "He's safe," Detective Santos assured me. Eleanor, after all this, you still worry about his welfare? He's still my son, I replied simply. I can hate what he did while still hoping he finds some path to genuine redemption. After hanging up, I walked through my house, turning off lights and locking doors, security measures that had become second nature since the trial. But as I reached for the deadbolt on my front door, I paused. For 63 years, I had lived in fear of various things: poverty, abandonment, failure, loss. For 3 years, I had unknowingly lived under the shadow of planned murder. Tonight, I realized I was no longer afraid. I was a woman who had stared evil in the face and refused to blink. I was a survivor who had turned her trauma into purpose. I was a mother who had loved unconditionally and learned to love wisely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others, new chances to build meaningful relationships based on mutual respect rather than dependency. The money Daniel and Samantha had coveted so desperately would be used to create something beautiful: scholarships, support programs, hope for young people who might otherwise turn to desperate measures. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, the same bedroom where I had lain awake so many nights worrying about Daniel's future, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement for what tomorrow might bring. At 63, I wasn't ending my story, I was beginning a new chapter. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of survival, justice, and rebirth. If Eleanor's story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories of resilience and courage. I'd love to hear from our amazing viewers around the world. Please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your support means everything, and together we're building a community of people who believe that it's never too late to reclaim your power and rewrite your story.